So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Anika Hsiung Schneider. Anika is a narrative artist who draws on lived experiences, memory, and family history. With an Asian mixed female identity, she resides in a highly racialized body that also exists in a liminal state. This connection to a liminal state of being closely connects her work to themes of loss, transitional spaces, and visualizing the intangible. Anika received her MFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. She currently serves as Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs at Minnesota Center for Book Arts and adjunct faculty at NCAT. Anika's work has been exhibited nationally at galleries such as Sioux Visual Arts Center, Rosalux Gallery, Gallery B. St. Paul, Circle Gallery, Biz Arts, Dumbarton Concert Gallery, and Glen Echo Park Partnerships for Arts and Culture. Anika is one of the artists featured in our current exhibition, Edible. Edible is an exhibition that explores how Asian American artists use ceramics incorporating food aesthetics to explore cultural identity. Probes our relationship to what we eat and the deep intimacy that is created in the act. The exhibition considers how the way we consume food links us to each other, our loved ones, and our ancestors. I would like to say a tremendous thank you to the Wingate Foundation, without whose generous support this exhibition would not be possible. For the folks joining us on Zoom, please note that this talk is being recorded, so please mute your microphones and camera feeds. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and a staff member will ask them for you at the end of the presentation. If you do lose connection during the presentation, the recording will be uploaded to NCC's YouTube channel as soon as we are able to perform some short editing. Now, without any further ado, I will get the lights and turn the floor over to Anika.
Okay. Okay. All right, we can do it. Thank you, guys. For the people physically here, I'm fine if you interrupt with questions. It's not a very big group. But hi, I already covered some of this as did Sean. But my name is Anika, and I call myself a narrative artist working primarily in printmaking and ceramics, and as well as other mediums. I am originally from the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., and moved here in 2017 to attend graduate school at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And I currently work at MCBA as the Director of Exhibitions and Artist Programs. I come from a Chinese American mixed race family and grew up in a multi-generational household with my grandmother. So before printmaking and ceramics were core to my practice, I was working in making figurative oil paintings. This painting is 64 inches by 77 inches from 2018 and is titled Kitchen Table Caving. I think this piece is a good indicator of where my practice will take me. It is, I believe, looking back now and making the slides for this talk, is my first work I have made to have food and be centered around my family's kitchen space. At the time, I was making paintings about my grandmother's dying process that explored memory, changing family dynamics, and time during this period and how it affected my family. So my work after graduation delved first into printmaking and then into ceramics. I will talk a bit about what each of my processes looks like for each of these mediums and how they reflect each other in my eyes. These are some of the first prints I made that helped transition my work from work about my family and memory to more directly explore my own identity. When putting this slideshow together, I was struck by the similarities between the previous painting and the triptych of these prints. Although working in another medium, the movement and handling of time really visually tied together for me between these pieces. When I was making these prints, I was thinking a lot about Chinese bird and flower paintings and how to adapt that format to really feel like myself and my own background. Through the act of recreating and restructuring Chinese symbols and objects intermixed with American cookware, I was creating my own narrative of what it means to be Chinese, to have Chinese family, and yet struggle with cultural gaps by creating this visual identity that is my own. The prints and ceramic piece in this picture were part of my exhibition titled Chinese-ish, which opened 3 years ago at Sioux Visual Arts Center here in Minneapolis. This was my first time really incorporating ceramics into my practice. I have been making ceramics now for 3 years, but I also feel like I don't know much about ceramics and am much more a printmaker in my knowledge of print. Before making the work in this exhibition, I had only taken one ceramics course in undergrad. But upon starting to print for this exhibition, I just knew there had to be a ceramics element. So I signed up for a pottery class at Powderhorn Recreation Center, which is where all of my original work was made and where I made work until this past fall when I joined Fired Up Studios in Golden Valley. So I started to pull out objects from my prints and create ceramic versions. Memory is still a core element of my work, and I never want to make my ceramics feel like replicas of objects or sculptural renderings of my print work, but rather a retranslation of them and the memory of those objects. Sometimes this is a personal memory, or sometimes it is what I think of as a cultural memory and tied to the Chinese cultural nostalgia I experienced from growing up in the US. All right, here are some more examples of my printmaking work from Chinese-ish. As you can see, ceramics were already playing a big part in these prints, even before I had made any ceramic work. Here you can see the direct relation between my ceramic work and my prints, with the Corning ware, with the Baicai in it, appearing directly in both pieces. The animals in my prints are based off of animals I grew up with pets, but they also draw on a deeper Chinese memory. With the animals, I also reference Chinese stories and fables I either heard or were alluded to in conversation growing up. These animals are amalgamations of my pets and Chinese storytelling, becoming characters in my narratives. The quail in the print are bobwhite quails, which I raised growing up. I've always had a deep love of animals and parents who supported that through my many pets growing up. Okay. I am now going to explain a little bit more about the technical side for how I make my work and the connections that I see between my print work and ceramics. So these are my two main tools. They also demonstrate how my practice is still deeply connected to my background in drawing and painting. The twisted scribe makes all my line work in my prints, and the needle tool creates all of the lines and cuts in my clay, and they're the only two things I really use to make my prints and ceramics, besides these two pieces of machinery, the etching press and the slab roller, which are also very similar things. That is not the slab roller I use. That is from the internet. I did not have a picture of me at the slab roller like the etching press, which was unfortunate. But they essentially perform the same function of applying pressure, and it's the exact same movement with my body to run my prints through the press or create the slabs I use to create all of my ceramics. So I'm going to explain a little bit of how I actually make my prints. This is generally something that even experienced printmakers are a little confused about and not familiar with, and I wasn't sure what everyone's background would be in the audience. So I use a technique called dry point etching, which is a form of intaglio for my print work. So I take very thin pieces of plastic called Duralar, which is similar to Mylar, and I take the twisted scribe I showed on the previous page to scratch into the plastic and create all my line work. And then because the plastic is so thin, I cut it out. And then I have individual thin plates for printmaking. So then I have a big sheet of plexi as my main plate that I put my thin plates on, that I ink up with a brayer, and then I ink all the objects, the animals, individually. So I wipe on the ink essentially. It catches in the line work and then it's mostly removed from the other parts of the plate by wiping it off. Sometimes I leave some. I'm a very painterly printmaker, as you can see. So in explanation here, you can see the plate I printed from on the left, my first print, which is on the right, and then the middle print is sort of an altered ghost type print. So I take all the ink that's left that did not transfer onto the paper through my first pass through the printing press. And then I tend to move the objects around, maybe re-ink some areas, and then create what's called a ghost print of the ink left, and create a second print. So all of my prints are either unique prints or kind of in pairs of two like this. So you can see on that middle print a little bit of how the previous print, the first print impacted it, the original, with like the shadows of the cattails, which was behind the thin piece of plastic, so that ink stayed and then sort of had more ink when I printed the middle print. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So with my printmaking practice, I'm thinking a lot about how this sort of physical embodiment of the original and reinterpretation and retranslation and those changes that are caught from the plate to the print to the ghost print reflect a lot of the things I'm thinking about within my own culture identity of, you know, having elements of Chinese culture, but not all of them. And some elements of Chinese culture have changed that might feel really Chinese to me and my family, but it's not the same for people who grew up in China or in another Chinese American family. Okay, so on this slide, see a little more into my process with ceramics. So I make all of my work from slabs that I then piece together. So I think of that a lot in how it mirrors my printmaking practice of I'm cutting out pieces similar to the plastic plates I'm making and reforming them and putting them in different ways and relating the objects in different ways to create my ceramic work. The duck, and there'll be a series of 8 ducks in edible in the exhibition. I created them a lot by creating compositions of using the scraps of other pieces of clay from my slabs and piecing them together. And that feels like very much how I also form my printmaking compositions of having many objects that I've etched and then piecing them together to figure out the compositions I want. So this is a print that I made a year after the ones on the previous slides. During that year, I learned a lot and further developed how I used my technique in printmaking. In that year, I began to delve into self-portraiture for the first time. And for the first time, I'm the protagonist accompanied by my animal characters to embody traditional character tropes. The prints are meant to feel allegorical, but also have a sense of uncertainty to capture the tension between my strong sense of Chinese identity and identity built upon loss and cultural nostalgia. These prints, along with ceramic work and lanterns, were seen in my exhibition ABC Kitchen at Silverwood Park last year. Here is a view of that exhibition, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kitchen table. Okay, so this is a painting that I completed while in grad school. It's a very long painting. It's about 25 feet long by 5 feet tall. As you can see, that sort of view of the kitchen is coming back again. And I was thinking a lot about the time spent in the kitchen and people coming and going, and the permanence of objects sometimes, and compared to people who come in and out of space. Here's a close-up of one of the ends of that painting, so you can see a little bit more. So then this table, the kitchen table, is reflected in this exhibition with the same kitchen table light hanging over the table. So with the kitchen light and the lanterns, I was thinking a lot about ancestors who are no longer with us and how they still, you know, impart themselves and how their presence can still be felt in sort of an intangible way of sort of placing my grandmother, who always sat at the head of the kitchen table. As you can see here, that was her spot she always sat at. and sort of just leaving the kitchen light, but then also including other lanterns within the exhibition. And these lanterns, it's hard to capture, but I wanted to show they're all printed as well with the same technique on the paper that I use for my prints, with imagery from the prints, tending to be botanical elements and animal elements from my prints pulled out onto my lanterns. And then I usually get a lot of questions about my lanterns, so I included this in. So I sort of use updated traditional techniques to build my lanterns. So they are all handmade and fully collapsible lanterns. So I make this armature out of foam core. It would traditionally be wood, not foam core. But then the armature collapses. You can see there's ribs on it and then sort of a gear shaped piece at the top. So you can pull that out and then pull the ribs out. So first you build the armature, piece it together, coil the ribs, the reed around in circles, and then I create a pattern to cut the paper out in the right size to fit in between each of the ribs that I have printed. I use an Eastern Thai mulberry paper. And then after the paper is on, you can disassemble the armature and pull the ribs out. And then you're just left with the lantern. So some of them are quite large as well. And I believe there'll be a few in edible accompanying my work. So that's that format of lantern, but I'm thinking about lantern. I've been thinking about lanterns coexisting with ceramics for a few years now. This is another image from my exhibition, Chinese-ish. And so lanterns are sort of tied to ancestors in a different way with this piece. This piece is titled On Ancestor Veneration. So I wanted to take some of the traditions and elements of my family and how we interact with ancestors or pass away loved ones, and bring that into this installation piece. So besides my ceramics sort of as an offering on the table and the lantern, my grandparents' printed portraits are on either side, and then those printed portraits are drawn from some of their visa pictures that accompany their visas and their signatures on the visas that I recreated. This is another image from Chinese-ish, which is some of my other first ceramic work. So this living room table is set up mid-mahjong game and invites viewers to hold and examine the tiles, whether they know the game or not. I was spurred to make this mahjong set after a pair, I believe, of white women in Texas redesigned traditional Chinese mahjong tiles because they wanted tiles that fit their aesthetic more suitably. My memories of playing mahjong are about my grandmother and tied to cultural connection and love. So by hand making 144 mahjong tiles, I grappled with what is taken when white people appropriate, but also exoticize Eastern culture at once. And mahjong must be played in a group and as a game represents family. The connection between the players and the equally valued tiles versus Western card games with hierarchical cards, I feel like really highlights the philosophical differences between Eastern and Western cultures. Here are some more of my ceramic vases that I have made many, many of, which I feel like also tie back into how I want these objects to feel instantly recognizable, but also not like the objects and feel more like the memory of an object. These are also heavily influenced by chinoiserie and willowware, and I think that is also a common theme within my work of incorporating visual elements and aesthetics of chinoiserie, as that is something that is based on Chineseness, but not at all Chinese. And I think I see I make a lot of metaphorical connections with that within my own identity of being sort of based in Chineseness, but also not Chinese. Okay, so now I'm gonna finish a little bit by talking about some of my work that will be inedible, which I have not even seen installed yet. So I'm excited as well. I wish I had better images to show you, but I really just have made a lot of pieces and have not seen it all come together yet. But these are some of the jiaozi I have made, which I am not at all the first person to make ceramic jiaozi. I will say that. But I did have been thinking a lot about the concept of like fun functionality within ceramics work, of something that can be functional, but it's also fun and maybe not the most practical thing to use as a functional item. So I decided to also make these double and have a function as chopstick holders. So I made a bunch. There will be 111, I believe, in edible, which sounds like a ton, but also when they're small dumplings in piles, I don't I don't think it will look like an overwhelming amount either. But with this work, I started thinking a lot more about the production of food and bringing the market home and into the domestic space, which I will explain a little bit more about, but are also, I feel like, very familiar, but also new concepts that I am thinking about. So these, oh, it didn't change. Oh, there it goes. So these are some ceramic bites I had in the bags as if they were in a grocery store or a market. So with my work at Edible, it'll be set out on a table again, but I didn't so much want it to be about the kitchen table in the same way as my previous work, but kind of that in-between moment of not of having food and production items and food being cooked and being made like the dumplings with like as a major production. Um, so of kind of having the ingredients be of the market and food items, but not of the home yet, if that makes sense, and having not been handled and gone through the process of making them part of the home and this domestic space and being like food that's been made with love and care that you're ready to eat and have someone serve you yet. So I think that's really goes back to also my interest in transitional and in between spaces that reoccurs within my work. And although I said this is like new and something I was thinking about when making the work inedible, I think going back, it is reflected in previous work of in these prints that sort of had elements of food production with me as the protagonist, but I feel like I was thinking about such different things, although it relates when I was making these prints. Here are some more views of those prints in this series. And with this series, which I titled Double Consciousness, Double Happiness, I was, as I said, the first time being the protagonist in my prints, and I was also thinking a lot about my own understanding of my identity and that looking back at myself, which you have to do in self-portraiture, and how a lot of my own understanding of my identity has also been shaped with looking back at myself and just always trying to constantly analyze and think about how white Americans see me and what they see me as my identity and what they see me racially when they first meet me, and like their subtle or sometimes not so subtle reactions of asking about my identity or where I'm from, and how that looking back at myself through their eyes and then looking back at myself through self-portraiture has shaped a lot of how I understand myself and my identity. This next piece is my jadeite cabbage vase, which will be inedible. I have this in here because people love it and love talking about it and love telling me about it. I love it too. I don't actually have a lot to say about this piece, but I did want to say that, you know, it's my vessel version of a piece that is in the Taipei Palace Museum. of this jadeite cabbage. I did not mention, so between coming from China and the US, my family lived in Taiwan, and I still have family members in Taiwan. So this jadeite cabbage is something I've heard about. I've always heard about and sort of been in my consciousness. So I made the vessel version. And I don't know, and I think this like gets into questions of like who is my work for and what my audience is. I don't know that when people tell me like they love my cabbage vase, like if they know about this piece that it's so clearly after. But then there are people who know too. And I think that's sort of okay with me of having these levels of knowing and sort of having elements of my work be able to be appreciated for everyone. And then, you know, those people who know, and then that's extra special to me and them. Okay. Here are some further examples of work and how it will be in edible. And I'm taking both brand new pieces I've made and recombining it with pieces as seen in my past couple exhibitions that I showed. But also, you know, thinking about, I think, those different spaces in the kitchen and domestic world and like how they come into our space and what that kind of means for family dynamics in a kitchen, and especially for Chinese American or immigrant families. That's everything I have. Yes.
Is that character wool?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have made bowls with some different characters. That's the one I like the best, just based on how it looks in the ceramic.
Do you paint each one on, or
I paint each one on.
Wow.
Yeah. So that one, I didn't talk a lot, but all my like blue and white work is either underglaze or stain painted on top of just a white glaze. Well, which is I.
Is there a significance for you for that?
I was going for like when I was making some of these vessels with characters, like ones that I felt like tied to identity, and like that's obviously you, your identity, I. But I was also doing like character names of my family, and just different ones that I thought about, and also different ones that it was also kind of like tied to my experience in Chinese classes in Chinese school of like writing the characters over and over again and trying to memorize them, and like going through that process on ceramics, and just like all that work put into like building muscle memory to write characters, and how I like really don't have it anymore at all, but sort of recreating that experience and that muscle memory and writing them, painting them on ceramic. It's good you could recognize that. It's kind of like, I feel like I like it also because it's not like exactly clear what the character is.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about what inspires your sense of?
Oh, yeah, of course. That's a good question. I always say part of what inspires my sense of color, because I think so much of my work too is like grounded in my childhood experience because of like that formation of identity in childhood. But also because I feel like there's like a strong element of play in my work, and like also like how I go about putting it together. Like installation process is like very important to me because it's like I am like sort of playing with my ceramic pieces and prints and like figuring out how they go together and like making setups almost as like you do with as a kid as your toys. So I also always say like that relation of play, I feel like, and those childhood experiences of play also very much go back to Crayola crayons for me and all my drawings. So I also say like Crayola crayon colors also very much impact my color palette. Yeah, of course. Are there any other question.
What in your childhood led you to art? Were you always making art as a child?
No, I mean, I was, but I do not think of myself as being like an art kid. Like I was not like taking art classes or anything. I think I was always working on crafts and was like a crafty kid, and I did like do some painting, but I liked it, but I didn't like, and maybe it was more my thing, like looking back than I thought of it, but like as a kid, I did like not think of it as my thing. Like I thought of myself as like an outdoor kid, an animal kid, like playing in the creek. But then like I also like remember like I collected all these seeds from outside and like made everybody like a bracelet out of seeds for Christmas one year as a kid. So like there were like I was a maker, I think. And then I didn't really take art classes in school. That like was not something that was like valued in the school system I grew up in, or like I feel like culturally among my peers growing up. But then I took a drawing class just to fulfill my art credit in undergrad. And it was the drawing class and it was that instructor that really led me to art. But also I just remember I went to somebody's artist talk and I thought it was so interesting. And I was like, I just like want to be in art school and like learn about people's art. And I wasn't in art school. I went to a liberal arts school and I had already declared an environmental science major and I finished that. But then I was like, I remember also being up late one night in a library and like looking at all the credits for like what it would take to do an art major. And I was like, I think I can like just finish an art major. So I added it and I feel like a couple of my credits were like kind of fake, but they let me have the major. And then that's also part of the reason I decided to go to grad school because I always like felt like I missed out and like wanted like an art school experience and to like be around artists like all the time. And yeah, that's how I became an artist.
Do you work exclusively from memory or do you use family photos?
I do use family photos. I use them a lot more when I was painting. And that was, I think, a lot more about my paintings were also thinking a lot more about like the family archive and like more scientifically and literally like how memory changes, like how does photography also impact memory with my paintings. So I do work from photography. I do less in my current work than in past painting work.
Yeah. What was the shift to 3D like for you?
It was fine. I know. I just went for it. I didn't think like I feel like I still don't really know a lot about ceramics, and I feel like people get very frustrated with ceramics, and I'm like, I don't know. I guess maybe I intuitively understand some things, but I'm like, it usually kind of like works for what I want it to be. I don't know. And I think as I was saying, like it does feel just so related to my printmaking and how I'm making in other elements of my practice that it felt like a very natural transition.
Be a horrible question, but where do you see your work going in the future?
That's not a horrible question.
It's a pressure question.
I don't know. I mean, even when I think I know, I I don't like I make generally also for deadlines. Like I have a full-time day job. I'm not in the studio every day. I used to be thinking, and maybe I am thinking about my artwork like all the time, maybe on a daily basis, maybe not quite a daily basis anymore. But then when I have that pressure, I make a lot and then I think a lot and in sort of short bursts. Like a lot of this work, like all my ducks in the piece you'll see in Edible, all of that, like I made all of the new things, which I guess you'll see on my labels, which what's labeled 2024 was made between mid-January and mid-February. So I made it all in like a month, which is how I tend to work in the future. I mean, I want to do a lot more experimentations with my lanterns. I feel like there's a lot left to explore there, and like what imagery I pull on them and put on them, and like thinking about how the prints can like relate to these 3D objects with the lanterns. I would like love to actually learn more about ceramics. Like I said, I've had one undergrad class and then worked at Powderhorn Recreation Center for a couple years, which is great and such a great community resource. But like, I don't really even like know how like firing works. I don't know really what the difference. I sort of have a big understanding of like what this is beyond what you will know, but like what the difference is between like mid fire and high fire and code 6 and code 10, like sort of, but I would like love to actually learn more and see where that takes me.
Does your full-time work relate to your artistic thinking in any way?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I mean, in my full-time work, I'm fortunate that like I'm always interacting with other artists and being able to be in conversation with them about their work and their work at exhibitions and how they want to see that installed and how I'm going to think about it and pull it into the gallery and think about how that space and being in the gallery, like how can I strengthen their work through that installation process and bring their vision to life. And I think because installation's so tied into like my practice and like how I'm thinking of the positioning of things, that's like very like that feels like the same work to me, whether it's for my own practice or for someone else's.
I apologize if I missed this because I was kind of darting back and forth a little, but
No problem.
I do really like sort of like these almost like innocuous nature of like the clay vessels, not just like the food, but like the actual like the colander and things like that, which I think is kind of neat because I think maybe like a more traditional ceramics background where it's, you know, the art history of ceramics is drummed into you from day one. So much of early to contemporary ceramics history is centered, you know, in China and the technological like and technical mastery of, you know, ancient to contemporary Chinese potters. I guess my question is more like, do you ever see like maybe those more traditionally like associated like vases or things of like that nature ever like making their way into your work more? Because I know you have like the slab built, like I've seen like blue whiteware pieces.
Yes.
But it is kind of like, I mean, there's like echoes of it, but like I'm curious to know if like you're interested in exploring those or like if like that sort of more traditional like domestic object is like really the important thing.
No, I absolutely do. That is something I have like even written proposals on. I haven't gotten, so I haven't done it yet. Because I need that deadline and also financial support to make those things happen. But like something I'm really interested in thinking about more is like my animals in my work, and then also like my thinking about like ancestors and like that passing space is like Chinese tomb figures and like how that could be brought into my work like in ceramic of like looking at like Tang Dynasty like tomb figures and all of that and like how could that impact my work and doing research more and learning more about that and like how then like what does that mean to me like here in this moment and my family and like how could that relate to that? But also like vases and other like elements of Chinese culture and ceramics there. But that's one thing I've specifically been interested in.
I really like the childish kind of looseness of how you do things, and I think it's really suitable with your memories and sort of the like and memory and storytelling. I think it's great.
Thank you.
I agree. I almost am so jealous of you to be able to just jump in and do this and not be stressed out by the technical aspects of clay. Because I can't even imagine working in that manner because immediately my brain goes to execution, firing, drying, what temperature, what chemicals, and I feel like that blocks me from creating. And you can just jump in and be like, "This is what I'm going to make,"
Yeah,
And
in
just,
some
I can feel
senses, I think like what I it is free because what I don't know, you know? You can't know what you don't know. And like, so,
you haven't learned that you can't do certain things.
right.
So
Like
you just
somebody
do
was
them.
like, told me they were like, this is like for my vases, they're like, this is underglaze on top of glaze. Like you can't do that. It's called underglaze. And I was like, I've made like 200 of these vases with underglaze on top of glaze. I think you can do it. Um, so, but like this piece, like I mean, I, in general, I think also, like, although I'm not working in additions in a typical sense of printmaking, but like repetition is a big element of my work too. I tend to like not be super precious about my work too. But I'm like, I could like remake this or do this again, or like, like I've made like probably like 200 of those vases and they're all unique, but like there's also a lot of repetition there. But then like sometimes with this vase, like it's in there, but it like actually broke a little bit and I glued it back together. It was like the one thing I moved this past fall, like that I did not want to break. And it's obviously the one thing that broke. So like I was waiting to move it because I was like, this like will just go with me. I will carry it in the car. So I hadn't like packed it. It was like the one thing left in an apartment. And my dog got scared from a door slamming and pushed it over by accident. And then I was just like, ugh, like the one thing I didn't want to break. And then before this, I was like, do I want to put something that's like been broken and fixed into like this exhibition? Like, I don't know. I like had some hangups around that. I was like, I'll just remake it. And then I was like, because I had no plan, I just jumped into it. I was like, I always think I can remake things. And I was like, I don't know how to remake this. Like, I don't even know how I did this. Like, I don't know. But I think like I also just like don't have the time and I just have to go into things to get it done.
But it comes across as a kind of joyous exploration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the way kids think about art is more like the fun of making it, not so much about how precious the end stuff.
I'm glad it does because sometimes I just feel like I'm actually just making in a furious frenzy and like am just like I've got to get this in, got to get this into the kiln because they're firing it this day and like the joy's there, but it's not. It's more like, especially when I was like making everything at Powderhorn, and I was there once a week for 4 hours, and I would hand build stuff at home and bring it in to be fired there. And I was like, everybody else was like, just like being so calm, or like throwing mug after mug, which is like great. And I was like, they must be like, she is so crazy. Like she's always just like a storm. And like, I'd be like, I've got to make like 1,000,000 of these and get them in. Yeah.
You, considering your like connection to the outdoors, as a kid now and your learning studies background, do you ever think about using organic material in your installations?
Oh, no. People ask me this a lot of like, oh, do you like see not that exactly, but like variations of the question is like, oh, like with your environmental background, like do you see yourself like going into environmental art or like something like that? And I don't know, I mean, it's related. There's a lot of natural elements in my work. There's a lot of nature, but no, not really. Like I don't think of myself as an environmental art. I don't know like that's where my interest is within art. Um, Even though like I had a deep personal interest in that. Only thing like I would be like with the lanterns, I'm also always like, I better learn all these things and learn as much as I can. And I was like, I need to like learn paper making and how to make the paper for my lanterns and like learning paper making. And then I was like, this is like crazy. I don't have time for this. Like, I can't make this quantity of paper. Like, I have nowhere near enough time or energy to get good enough at paper making to make paper to print on to turn into lanterns. Um, yeah, and I mentioned it at someone, they're like, and I feel like, are you gonna like try to like grow the fiber next? And I was like, because you feel like you have to do that too. And I was like, I don't know, but like you can't do it all. So that's the closest I've come, I think, to like being like, I want to bring, which is different, I think, than what you're asking of like organic items into my work. I did a tiny bit on the on ancestor veneration piece. I had some like little dried things. I guess maybe as it relates to like the other things I'm exploring of like cultural elements, if something related there, that could be an entry point into more natural items, but I don't think that's happened for me yet. I don't know. I'll never say never either.
I'm curious to know your thinking process between making these pieces versus the vase. Is it because you have a great background, you decided to only work with slab?
Oh, that's a good question. I tried throwing like a few times and I like hated it. And then I was like, and I just liked I just liked using slabs and I think it just does so heavily relate to me and it's like comfortable for me. But even before like in undergrad when I took that class, I was like not like everybody else was like throwing and that's I feel like everybody's like always like I want to learn how to throw and like I get that it's so cool. It's magical in a different way. But I was like always making slabs too and like my random stuff I was making in undergrad was very different. Um, and then I think I tried like throwing against once more and I was like, this is like so messy and I don't know what I'm doing and it hurts my hands. And I was like, this isn't for me. And I always like tell myself and like I also like try to tell my students, like, if you don't like it, don't do it because that's just gonna stop you from making things. And like you've just gotta like make things in my mind. I don't know. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Well, I guess I have follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I really love the execution of all your bite-sized pieces.
Oh,
Is it because you're thinking, oh yeah, that's how the actual vegetable is? There are different layers, so I'm doing each slab, like each
yeah.
petal of the, I think I don't know if they're called petals, vegetable.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that, and just the way it came out, just so.
I want to say that's how it started, which I think it is. But like I had bite-sized in my like prints first. And what I like also realized from making this slide, like I always am like, it's such a back and forth process between my print work and my ceramics. And I was like, have I been lying about that? Because I was like, these things were all, I can always, I think, pretty much pinpoint all of everything I've made besides like this, but also in a way with the bite side, like to my prints first before I made it in ceramic. Um, so I had it in my prints first, so that influenced me making the ceramic. And I think part of it, I do remember being like, oh, like this is easy to build out of a slab. Like it's flat things you put together. Like that works really nicely. Because I have thought like of other vegetables. I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if that's like gonna look good. But then I think I also just like of like bite side, like how familiar that is to like everyone. Like also just now in America, it's like just like such a ubiquitous vegetable, I feel like now that has like gone beyond just like Chinese people or Chinese Americans. Yeah, like even like I was I had an exhibition like several like hours north of here, like in greater Minnesota, like far away in a small like town. And like one of the people at the town, like so it's just like a very white audience for the exhibition. She was like, it's like so like funny you like made like so much bok choy here. Like she was like, we are actually like eating bok choy for dinner, like which isn't very common. So it's like so funny that like it's in this exhibition and we're eating this unusual vegetable for dinner. And I was like, okay, but like it's not an unusual vegetable to like many people. but even that, like, she knew what it was and recognized that it had like this related, like, was gonna eat it for dinner. It had this relationship to it in rural Minnesota.
Awesome. Anika, thank you so much. We really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
everyone. Thank you for coming.